Hello, and welcome everyone to the 4th out of 5 webinars hosted by Hong Kong as part of our Race to Zero webinar series, Uniting Asia to Combat Climate Change. My name is Jasper Hilkhuizen, and I am from the Arup Hong Kong office. Today, we focus on the theme of nature-based solutions, with the overall question being, what role can nature play in both mitigating and adaptation to climate change? We are thrilled to have yet again an excellent panel coming from all parts of the world to share their insights. After their presentations, there's time reserved for a panel discussion and for Q&A, so please do post your questions and comments in the chat box, and we will aim to address those at the end. Today's discussion will be moderated by Ms. Lulu Zhou. Lulu has more than 15 years of experience in sustainable development and nature conservation, and she currently is the Director of Strategic Partnerships in the Nature Conservancy Asia Pacific region, leading the philanthropy and conservation programs in Hong Kong. Now, without further ado, Lulu, over to you.
Thanks, Jasper, for your kind introduction. And thanks to Arup and Civic Exchange for inviting me to moderate this themed webinar on nature-based solution today. So now I'm up, I can see my face. Hope you all can see and hear me okay. So as we all know, COP26 is just around the corner, and the key goal of this summit is to have countries to commit to and work on radical carbon emission reductions and become more resilient against climate impact. So how can nature-based solutions contribute to this goal? First, maybe we should make sure we are talking about the same thing when defining nature-based solutions. A widely accepted definition by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, is that it refers to actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems to address pressing social and environmental challenges, such as climate change. So in that sense, nature-based solutions are not new to us. They have been playing a powerful role in sequestering and storing CO2 and mitigate future climate change. Actually, a study led by the Nature Conservancy in 2017 that's published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences found that nature has the potential to deliver 1/3 of the near-term affordable carbon reduction goals to keep the temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius. And TNC's global aspiration is that within the next 10 years to advance our conservation work, resulting in removal or sequestration of 3 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. To put that in context, that's about equivalent of removing 650 million cars off the road annually, which is the total number of automobiles in China and the US combined. So at the same time, we need to recognize that climate is changing despite our best effort to cut emissions today. Therefore, we need to build natural defenses, complement gray infrastructure with green and blue options to reduce climate risks and avoid loss of homes and lives. NBS, nature-based solutions, are cost-effective, available, and scalable. And they provide a range of ecosystem services such as biodiversity, clean water and air, mental health benefits, and so on and so forth. So they must be integrated in urban development planning processes, and they must be incentivized through a carbon financing market. And this will be the focus of our panel discussion today. So without further ado, let me start introducing our panelists. First one, Mr. Terry Fuller. He is the CEO of the Chartered Institution of Water and Environmental Management, CIWEM. And CIWEM is an independent charity that represents a community of professionals and organizations dedicated to improving water and environmental management. So here we have a question for Terry, and this is how he will open his presentation today. Terry, could you please share your perspective based on your rich project experience, on how nature-based solutions could play an important role in achieving the goals of COP26, particularly from a climate risk reduction angle. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Lulu, for that kind introduction. Good day to everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity to take part in this really important webinar series. Lulu set the scene very nicely, and I'm going to open actually by looking at the sort of mitigation and adaptation side of the climate coin. And to start off with an acknowledgement that I'm sure many will make actually, that the recent International Panel for Climate Change sixth assessment report really did give us the starkest warning yet. The conclusion, one of the conclusions was that if we stay on the current trajectory, then we are very likely to meet a 1.5 degree warming of the planet between 2030 and 2052. And even with radical reduction, this might actually be unpreventable. But actually, for me, the report contained one simple and unequivocal statement about a reality that I think we've been ignoring for far too long. And that is that the conclusion that there is a strong now scientific link between human-induced climate change and extreme weather events. And we can all, I think, look to extremes around the planet that are becoming ever more present and ever more frightening. And this is exposing the fragility of our built and social infrastructures. Just looking at recent examples of droughts in Iran, fires in Greece, flooding in Germany, and of course, in recent years, typhoon conditions in Hong Kong. So we cannot cope with the change that we already have, let alone what is to come. And I think there's just been too little acknowledgement of the importance of resilience and adaptation for far too long. So I'm really encouraged actually that the presidency of the COP26, which takes place next month in Glasgow, has a focus on resilience. And also the presidency makes specific mention to nature-based solutions and their importance. So Lulu's given us a definition of nature-based solutions, so I won't attempt to repeat that. But here on the slide, you can see the 3 ways that I think nature-based solutions are applied in tackling climate change. And I'm just going to talk around those 3 different ways. That is indirectly and a sort of little and often type basis, directly as a frontline reduction of risk, and in terms of buying time. And I'm going to talk about this in the context of inland flooding and coastal flood risk. So that's the main sort of focus of this, what I'm about to say. So first of all, then, nature-based solutions in terms of indirect methods. Quite often, this is, as I say, done on a little and often basis. So we're looking here at a series of small interventions grouped for tackling larger events in combination. And often this is indirect rather than facing a flood risk on the front line. So for example, attenuation of runoff in the upper catchment. And you can see on this slide here, just one example really of slowing the flow, where we use techniques like woody dams for holding waters in the upper catchment and reducing the amount of water that reaches our river systems. This can also include changing agricultural practices and other land management practices, for example. And of course, afforestation, which we're seeing increasingly returning now for the purposes of carbon sequestration. But if we plant those trees in a thoughtful manner, we can also include that as part of a nature-based flood risk reduction technique. Just moving on and thinking about this in the urban environment, then we have sustainable drainage systems or sustainable urban drainage systems. nothing new about this or the previous technique, really. It's been around for some while. And it's a similar concept, of course, to the upper catchment management methods. And you might hear this referred to or applied to as in terms of sponge cities. And that's something very intrinsic now in the planning that's going on by the Drainage Services Department in Hong Kong. We're really embracing this technique or this approach as part of building resilience against severe typhoon conditions. Of course, this has got multiple benefits, and I won't dwell too much on those. Hopefully we are aware, but this is not just about attenuating flows, of course, particularly in urban areas. It's about increasing biodiversity, bringing a cooling effect for the city as it gets hotter, and just creating a pleasant environment to live and work, and many other benefits. And I think such systems, they can offer a hybrid direct and indirect reduction of flood risk. So, for example, reducing runoff into drainage systems and rivers, that's a key feature, but also reducing localized flooding as well. But sometimes we have no choice but to provide resilience measures right in the front line of extreme climate. And our coastlines offer us, I think, the best examples, or some of the best examples of this. And traditionally, this has been the domain of hard engineering, so build walls, revetment systems, etc. But increased climate pressure is making such solutions not only unsustainable, actually, in some cases, unviable, just not viable. And I want to just sort of talk about and just show you an example quickly of something which is referred to as managed realignment, which again is nothing particularly new. It's where we allow the historic line of a defence the freedom to move. And by working with the natural processes, natural coastal processes, this is as much a nature-based solution as the better known techniques perhaps described above. So on the slide now, this is Medmenham. It's on the south coast of England. To the left of the picture, you can see a narrow shingle ridge that was being relied upon to reduce flood risk for hundreds of homes and some critical infrastructure. And the historic practice here was to recycle shingle and reprofile the beach to maintain its height and width. But we were seeing an increase in frequency and severity of wave and tidal conditions, and it was making this practice expensive and very disruptive and not sustainable. It was also forcing maintenance teams to carry out repairs during storm conditions, while storm conditions were taking place on an emergency type basis. And tragically, there was an event where one maintenance colleague was killed during an operation. And that was really part of a turning point to say, enough is enough. This is not a sustainable practice. So the solution that was adopted was to allow the shingle beach the freedom to move under natural processes and to breach. And if you see the picture here, you can see now a breach in that defence, what was previously a defence. And that then allows intertidal conditions to develop in the area behind. You'll probably note from the picture that there is some inland embankment that's been constructed, but actually what we've found is that that's not really called into operation, that the intertidal area is so effective at dissipating naturally the wave energies and tidal energies coming into that system that, that the embankment is not really called into use. Of course, what this has done is create a highly resilient, sustainable and adaptable system without the need now for regular maintenance intervention. At the time, the project was one of the largest open coast realignments in Europe, certainly, and it was one of the first in the world to be so heavily in the front line of coastal storm conditions. There have been others since around the world. And so whilst this presented technical challenges at the time, the biggest challenge actually was to gain public acceptance that this would work, that it would actually reduce exposure to risk and not worsen it, especially as for some it appeared that we were just abandoning the land to the sea. So to my final point here, and that is about buying time. Like it or not, there are many situations where no measures, natural or otherwise, will be sufficient to create sustainable living conditions, especially in the face of future changes in climate. And as difficult as it is to face up to that, some very well-established conurbations will have to move to survive. But this cannot happen quickly for physical, political reasons, but above all, emotional reasons, because we're talking about people's homes here. We can already look to some parts of the world where relocation is in progress, but typically this is where the water is already lapping at people's feet or the ground is disappearing below those feet. We can look at Fiji, the Solomon Islands, Alaska, and Louisiana for such examples. I think we need to recognise the importance of acting before the need becomes so live. Change is difficult for people to handle. It takes time. It takes acknowledgement of a situation, and we need to build ownership as well if we're to make such dramatic changes to people's lives. And this, I think, is where nature-based solutions offer us an opportunity that perhaps isn't so often thought about, and that is to buy us time by attenuating the impacts of climate change until communities are ready to relocate. So just in summary, nature-based solutions are an essential component for building resilience to a changed and changing climate. They offer multiple benefits, including carbon sequestration and nature recovery, but they also offer solutions now where engineered schemes just will not work. It's up to us all to place resilient thinking at the heart of everything we do. And this is actually best served, I think, by placing nature-based solutions at the heart of everything we do. Now, being part of CIWEM's community of experts in Hong Kong and elsewhere provides you with a perfect environment and support to be able to make this shift. So please do get in contact with me about CIWEM, and I can put you in contact with our local branch in Hong Kong. So thank you very much, Lulu. That concludes what I wanted to say.
Great, thank you, Terry. Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and especially the point on buying time, and also the importance of raise the public awareness on nature-based solutions. Quite important and vital one. So with that, let's turn to the second panelist. We have the pleasure to have Mrs. Georgia Holt, Senior Associate of Business Development at South Pole, a carbon finance consulting company. So Georgia helps clients to set ambitious climate goals and empowers them by deepening their understanding of climate change and solutions available. She works collaboratively with commercial organizations on their climate journey towards net zero. So our question for you, Georgia, is that South Pole develops and implements emission reduction projects and strategies around the world. So how do you see nature-based solutions play a role in the carbon markets, and what are the carbon trading trends you observe? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Lulu. Can you hear me all right? Good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Let me start by giving you some context about who South Pole is and how we fit into the nature-based solution space. And then we'll go through what are nature-based solutions, what are the different types, and we'll give you a sneak preview into one of South Pole's very own projects. So South Pole has been around for 15 years, and we originally started as a carbon asset developer. Now we provide end-to-end climate solutions for corporates, and we do this through carbon accounting, strategic advisory on target and goal setting, renewable energy sourcing, carbon asset development, and also climate risk and opportunity assessment. We have boots on the ground in every continent except for Antarctica. And this is so that we can scale our impact globally and really increase our operations. Now, our mission is to accelerate the transition to a climate smart society. And to do that, we work with a lot of companies who are already on the road to net zero or who have set climate neutrality targets. And in order to get there, we need to scale up financing for carbon projects and in particular nature-based solutions. Part of the journey to net zero is taking responsibility for your carbon footprint and compensating for those emissions through carbon credits. And we are seeing an increased focus on those carbon credits coming from nature-based solutions. Now, within the carbon market, what constitutes a nature-based solution and what benefits do they provide? Nature-based solutions projects provide either avoided emissions or carbon sequestration through various mechanisms, and we'll go through those in a second. They not only restore and protect ecosystems, but they reduce the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. For example, forests, mangroves, and peatlands absorb and lock in the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they also reduce the impacts of flooding by stabilising slopes. And when they are managed sustainably, they provide improved livelihoods for the surrounding communities, which helps to reduce deforestation rates. And you can see here, regenerative agricultural techniques also protect the soil health, and that's through reducing tillage and through putting on a cover crop in between cycles. Now, I wanted to talk you through how carbon credits are generated in a bit more detail, and we'll take the forest protection method as an example. So there are specific calculations used to determine the deforestation risk within an area and the amount of carbon stored within a forest. And if that forest is protected from deforestation, and therefore the emissions are not released into the atmosphere, those avoided emissions are converted into carbon credits, and these calculations and carbon credits are verified by the International Carbon Project Standard that forest is registered under. So then the project is issued with carbon credits, and then these nature-based solutions carbon credits can be used in your climate strategy. There are a variety of different nature-based solutions, and to start off with, we have the RED Plus project, which is it's reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. And these projects protect the vital carbon sinks from being cut down and releasing those carbon emissions to the atmosphere. But they also protect the biodiversity within that ecosystem and provide sustainable benefits to the surrounding communities. And blue carbon projects fall under this project type. The next one we have is sustainable agriculture, which is changing farming techniques to be more sustainable. So this improves soil health and sequesters the carbon into the soil, which retains more water and makes the ground more resilient to drought. And then the last project type is afforestation and reforestation. So afforestation is planting a forest on land that did not originally have a forest there. And then reforestation is planting forest on the land that originally had a forest. And this results in carbon sequestration from the atmosphere. Now I'd like to give you a sneak peek into one of South Pole's blue carbon projects. South Pole developed the world's first blue carbon project, Adantika, in Indonesia. And this project protects the biodiversity-rich and carbon-dense mangroves and peatlands from large-scale agricultural expansion. It is not only an example of protecting nature for nature's sake, but also meets a range of sustainable development goals and objectives, as you can see here, through engagement with the community and the project co-benefits. So these project co-benefits include providing alternative revenue and income streams to the local community, increasing food security, and providing opportunities for the locals in sustainable industries such as beekeeping, crab and shrimp farming, or coconut charcoal. Now, I haven't been to this particular project, but I have been to Costa Rica on a total conservation project. And the biggest problem facing that project was the threat of deforestation of the mangroves to make way for agriculture. So what these projects do is they place a vital importance on the ecosystem and they provide an alternative income for local communities so that the forest is protected from being cut down, and that protects the biodiversity and the species, such as the turtles or the orangutans or the sloths, depending on where you are in the world. Now, as more projects like Padang Tika come online, we will see a demand for nature-based solutions credits continue to grow. So let's go through supply and demand of carbon credits and nature-based solutions. This graph is from our own sources and external sources and was put together in October 2021, so it's pretty recent. And the graph shows the demand for nature-based solutions in the overall voluntary carbon market. So you can see the different project types as indicated by the different colours. Red is renewable energy projects, the grey is the waste projects, which often focus on methane. Yellow is energy demand projects, and then as indicated by the two blue lines, you have nature-based solutions. The light blue line is avoidance credits. So for example, Red Plus projects, and then the dark blue line is nature-based solutions removal credits. So for example, afforestation or reforestation projects. Now what we can see here is that nature-based solutions have been increasing rapidly over the last 5 years, and in 2021, the nature-based solutions avoidance credits were the most popular in the market. They were the #1 choice in the carbon market, and they outstripped even energy projects. So Red Plus project retirements are the highest of all carbon types, and this growth in nature-based solutions reflects a growing focus of buyers in protecting biodiversity, halting deforestation, and also contributing to community co-benefits and sustainable development outcomes like what we saw before. Now you can also see that removals retirements, which is the dark blue line, is growing rapidly. And this is due to a focus on carbon sequestration coming from net zero commitments. However, the volume overall for the removals credits is smaller because of the long project timeframe for establishment of removals projects, and also because of the smaller volume issuances. Now, what can we take from this? Removals and avoidance nature-based credits are growing and will continue to do so. And we will see this trend of people loving nature-based solutions into the future. So South Pole is here to develop more projects to provide that supply of nature-based solutions credits around the world and meet the demand in the transition to net zero. I'm Georgia Holt, I'm from South Pole, and it's been a pleasure to talk to you about nature-based solutions. If there's any questions, I will try my best to answer them, but we have a team of experts who can help out with more technical ones offline. And thank you. Back to you, Lulu.
Thank you, Georgia. That's great. It's really exciting to hear, the demand for NBS projects is on the rise. And this is really a tangible way for us to start valuing nature, right, in a market mechanism where corporations can get involved and the local community, or essentially the stewards of nature, can benefit directly. So thank you for your presentation. Really informative and again inspiring. So let's turn to our third, last but not least, panelist of the day, Mr. Kenneth Kwok. He's director with the Arup Hong Kong office and leads the East Asia water business. So Kenneth specializes in designing and management of projects around the water cycle, and he has been involved in climate change resilience works in Hong Kong, the Philippines, and Vietnam. So our question for you, Kenneth, is that you have over 20 years of experience in the water cycle projects. So in the context of Hong Kong and related to water, what is the relevance of NBS and related concepts such as sponge cities and blue-green infrastructure?
Thank you, Lulu. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity for me to give my view on nature-based solution, probably from a water engineer's perspective. In particular, I want to share a bit about how we, as engineer, plan and design with water for the new development and existing urban retrofits, such that we can become more in tune with the water cycle and the wider ecosystem. Nature-based solution for sustainable development, as we have already heard, is indeed not new. It is actually well acknowledged that our traditional gray infrastructure need to be more greener to start with to lower its ecological impact. So actually all nature-based solution involve several common elements. First of all, they need to work with and are based on natural system, and they will benefit nature directly, preserving or enhancing the diversity and the ecosystem services. They actually deliver value to the society by addressing some critical challenges, such as the climate change and human health. They will also deliver other benefits, such as facilitating urban regeneration, public health, and well-being. In the next few slides, I would have a couple case studies to share with you. Now, nature-based solution for water management would involve the planned and deliberate use of ecosystem service to improve the water quantity and quality so that we can increase resilience to climate change. So these are typically implemented together with conventional water infrastructure to bring about more sustainable outcomes. Of course, it is actually quite impossible to describe all the benefits of the nature-based solution on one slide. Nature, of course, is far too complex to be described in any way. So, however, we need to realize that any nature-based solution would rarely only have one benefit. For example, a wetland may produce clean water. It can also regulate water flow, and it can reuse the nutrient to support a diverse plant and animal ecosystem and provide social amenities. So I want to share with you a design with water framework, which we adopt in Arup to develop cost-effective integrated gray infrastructure and nature-based solutions that would be smart, resilient, and regenerative to tackle the pressing problem around water scarcity, flooding, and water pollution. So these solutions would bring nature and the natural features and processes into the cities, their landscape, and waterscapes, which in turn hopefully will bring wider benefit to the community and simultaneously providing environmental, social, and economic benefits and help build resilience. So as we respond to the increasing demand in the society for sustainable development, our solution would evolve from the more conventional of just being green, sustainable, to being more restorative and finally towards regenerative. So in the past decades, I think we would acknowledge that urbanization and more infrastructure generally cause a net loss to our nature. In the case of water, relying only on our conventional gray infrastructure, like the concrete drainage system, will actually cause the catchment to lose their capacity. They then become fragile and could not sustainably provide clean water or shield us adequately from drought and floods. You could argue that our best practice at present would adopt a green and sustainable approach with the bottom line of being that it would cause no damage or harm to the catchment. For example, we hear a bit about the sponge city guideline in China. It requires us that the overall runoff rate of a new development would not be higher than the pre-development stage, for example. However, moving into the future, even today's best practice will not be sufficient. As the planning, construction, and service life of water infrastructure tend to actually extend beyond decades, what we plan today actually need to adapt the concept of restorative and regenerative design, or they will not be compatible with the 2050 or 2060 net zero world. Essentially, we need to design the infrastructure in cities such that they will support the wider resources, allowing the ecosystem to renew and replenish, thereby creating net positive outcomes for nature and society. Therefore, the design of a new development in the future will definitely need to enable the new build to stay in tune with the nature, restoring and even regenerating the local ecology, for example, such as encouraging even higher biodiversity in the future. So let's see some of the water management initiative and nature-based solution in place in China, in Hong Kong. Terry has already explained a little bit about Sponge City and the blue-green infrastructure. So indeed, the Sponge City in China and the blue-green infrastructure in Hong Kong probably represent some of the most sustainable practice currently being adapted. So both making space for blue intervention, they could be rivers and water bodies, and green intervention, they could be greening and landscaping works. They would then promote infiltration, detention, storage, purification, reuse, and control discharge of water within the watershed. So China has been actually a strong advocate for Sponge City to protect themselves against flooding. Since its rollout in 2016, already some 33,000 projects were completed to date, and over 500 cities have developed their local guidelines for Sponge City implementation. Now, these Sponge Cities are designed to absorb any excess water through a series of landscape features like gardens, wetland, permeable pavement, ensuring that 80% of the land can actually retain, reuse, and harvest 70% of the stormwater. They will store then any excess rainfall in the underground tanks or tunnel until the flood has passed and discharge them back to the river sometime later. Some of these practices are actually worth study around the world. So here is one natural-based solution example from our portfolio of projects in China. To support Shanghai's 2030 planning vision, we have delivered a new drainage master plan for the urban areas of Shanghai, which cover an urban areas of about 640 square kilometers. So like many coastal cities in the world, Shanghai's drainage system is aging, is quite prone to flooding from rain, from rivers, and also from typhoons. It is also susceptible to groundwater infiltration, and the rivers suffer heavy pollutions. So as part of the project, we reviewed the previous drainage master plan. We challenge the traditional way of gray infrastructure thinking in the context of a congested metropolitan. We then proposed our visionary blue, green, and gray approach for the city to achieve the design goals, to improve the well-being, and to serve the urban redevelopment and enhance water resilience. We conducted a detailed analysis on the typology of the Shanghai urban areas using digital method to maximize the potential of the blue-green infrastructure. Next, the Dongcheng West Newtown extension is another project example we have in Hong Kong. Based on the blue-green infrastructure initiative from the government, although in the past, Newtown developments in Hong Kong would traditionally pay less attention to the nature, but after paying the price for rapid urbanization in the past few decades, the government would like to imagine and enable a different vision for this Newtown development. So our team, consisting of not only water engineers, but also urban planners and other specialists, ecologists from various backgrounds, will come together and collaborate to ensure the Newtown stay in tune with the nature. The river, which is at the heart of the development, will retain its environmental value as a watershed for flood retention and biodiversity, but also promote conservation and creation of passive and active recreational space for the general public. So the benefit of nature-based solution for water management is clear, in my view, and well proven. So for my last remarks, we do actually need to proactively rethink our traditional way of gray infrastructure design and also the governance approach. Doing it right, we can restore the nature and the degraded ecosystem, and we can also regenerate our urban areas and build climate resilience. With that, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Lulu.
Thank you, Kenneth. Great presentation, and I'm sure the audience could, like me, could relate to many of those projects, right? Rather like the one in Hong Kong, right in our backyard, also a few projects in Shenzhen or Shanghai. So we are not only just hearing the theories, but also we can experience the change nature-based solutions bring to our daily lives. And I always think, you know, a conservation organization cannot really mainstream NBS. It takes the city planners, the engineers, who can be on the same boat with us to really win the game. So thank you for that, Kenneth. Maybe now let's turn to the audience and take questions from our audiences. Here I'm just looking at some questions. Here's one for all the panelists. Maybe we can kickstart here. The question is, there is an increased request for transparency and evidence-based decision-making. For example, on the amount of carbon capture or number of species preserved or increased, et cetera, et cetera. So what are the key challenges in obtaining this kind of data, basically to evaluate and for decision-making? What are the thoughts from our panelists? Terry, over to you.
Thank you, Lulu. I'll share a quick thought. I mean, I think one of the biggest barriers to collecting data is that we don't think about that in planning a lot of the schemes and projects that we develop. We're very focused on solving the solution ahead of us, that we don't necessarily think about how we might gather data once that has been installed, and indeed the funding to allow us to do that, and the resources going into the future to collect that data and then share it in a meaningful way. So it needs to become an intrinsic part of our planning as much as the actual solution itself.
Yeah, Kenneth?
Yeah, I actually very much echo with what Terry has said. I think as an engineer, we always start with a vision for the project. And then actually quite soon, we jump onto the planning and the design such that we achieve the statutory compliance. So what's probably missing is some clear thinking or setting out of some KPIs. So because of the vision, because what we need to build, I think it's important to set up some KPI and then update and live through the KPI throughout the duration of the project. So this KPI need to be quantifiable, and then I think it also need to define, you know, data or performance monitoring criteria so that you know, the success of the project can be collected. And then also very important, it is you know, as we mentioned, it's not just the engineers, it's also the planners and all the ecologists and all. So I think having a wide set of KPI that cover various aspects of the ecosystem is also extremely important.
Great point.
And I agree absolutely, but I also think that we need to be increasing the skills of the people who are working in these projects. As nature-based solutions grows in demand, so will we need an equal growth in skilled workers who can do the monitoring and verification of these projects. And echoing what you were saying about the financing and funding behind it, we need to be finding automated ways of measuring the carbon. So the use of drones and the use of infrared sensing and technologies that will make it a lot easier to do this monitoring at a large scale.
Actually, a follow-up question back to Georgia along the same lines on data and evaluation. Here's a question. Using carbon offsetting to achieve the net zero position of a company has drawn some controversies in recent years for concerns such as, you know, carbon credit double counting or moral hazards and so on and so forth. So when we promote the use of nature-based solutions, how can you, especially speaking from South Pole point of view, to prevent such challenges or problems?
Yeah, that's a great point. And it is definitely a concern amongst carbon projects. You want to make sure that they have been verified to an international ICROA standard, and those standards uphold very strict rules around the project development and communication with the communities and the sustainable development outcomes that go with that project. So as long as we maintain the standards and the due diligence that goes behind these projects being developed, then that gives us guidance and confidence that we are investing into high quality offsets.
Great, thank you. Here's a question for Terry. Your explanation of buying time is much appreciated. In Asia, it appears those areas most prone to flooding and other natural hazards are often inhabited by marginalized communities that have nowhere else to go. I'm not sure this is only in Asia, I think in other continents too. So how can NBS provide benefits to those communities? Any take on that, Terry?
Yeah, thanks, Lulu. Well, I think with NBS is quite often it intrinsically involves time. So we're talking about systems that need time to develop, and it's not something that's just instantly installed and becomes a solution. That it can take time to develop, and it's something that I think people can feel very attached to as well in terms of involvement. Because I think if we are looking to lead communities into having to make some really tough decisions, life-changing decisions to relocate, we need to get that engagement and involvement. And I think it's much easier for a community to become emotionally and physically invested in a nature-based solution than it is in, say, the construction of a big concrete wall, for example, which is just sort of introduced by others and then just disappears. So I think there's something for me about how that it can intrinsically involve engagement of communities.
Thank you, thank you. The next question is for Kenneth. What do you see as the biggest challenge to move from sustainable to restorative, regenerative interventions? What is the skill set or mindset that's needed? Maybe this is from your colleague trying to, build some career path and see what kind of further skill building is needed.
Okay, thank you. If it's my colleagues, thank you, my colleague. So I think going from restorative to regenerative. First of all, I think we have to face the fact that currently all the statutory or regulation requirement probably points to the requirement to be still being green and sustainable, probably to a certain extent restorative. I think that the challenge is always the will or the support to go a step further, given all these technical, environmental, and equally the financial challenge. So I would say in the stage or the cycle of a project, the discussion with the client early on to define the vision and the objective of the project is important. Whether there's a common goal to do better than the business as usual would create successes later on. So in terms of the skill set, in the past, I would say 10, 20 years ago, planners and engineers work separately. So planners would plan the scheme and then the engineer come on board to do the design. Nowadays, it is probably more integrated that the planners and engineers would come together. To a certain extent, we will also call in other experts to give their views. But in order to be truly regenerative, so we do need to have a spectrum of stakeholders involved. It's no longer involved to do things in stages, but rather I think it's important to engage everyone early on in the project cycle so that each of our initiatives are taken care of early on.
Great. It's true. The nature-based solution is by nature a holistic approach that require close collaboration of cross-functional, teams and expertise. So great. And Terry, you want to add something?
Yes, if I may, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important point, but I think the other point as well, of course, and it links into multiple benefits, is that it enables us to engage with organizations, people, groups, etc., who have got that broad, who've got a specific interest, but that interest is met by this more holistic type solution. And of course, that's incredibly helpful when it comes to attracting funding. Which is still a challenge well, it's probably a challenge everywhere actually, but in a lot of parts of the world, we have a financial infrastructure, if you like, that's very geared towards hard solutions, engineered solutions, and gaining financial support for a nature-based solution is sometimes really quite difficult. But I think because it delivers such multiple benefits, you can then look to different places to receive that funding.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's not really gray infrastructure or green infrastructure. It should be both to look at a mix. And 1 + 1 are bigger than 2, hopefully. Cool. We have a question back to Georgia again, a practical or technical question. So what if some of the carbon asset is short-lived, such as destroyed by wildfire, which is possible? How are these kinds of impact accounted for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when these carbon projects are set up, there's also established a buffer pool, which takes into consideration the risk of deforestation, of fires, and any other threat to the project, which could result in the outcome that the project doesn't either avoid or remove as much carbon as what they set out to do. And this buffer pool can be anywhere between 5% and 30% of what had been planned to be sequestered or protected. Yeah.
I see. Great. Good to know. And another question for Kenneth. What are the potential for using NBS in existing compact urban areas and in the urban renewal projects? I think it's more from a cost perspective. If it's, like existing kind of old establishment, how to integrate NBS?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. I would like to think of it from multiple perspectives. First of all, I think there needs to be a driver to implement a nature-based solution. So quite often, because the multiple benefit it offers could be multiple flow. It could be to deal with the flooding issues at existing urban areas, or it could be at the same time help to regenerate and beautify the amenity, the neighborhood. So I would say cost is not always the dictating factors. I think is in addition to the quantifiable benefit, you probably, I think there are tools available to also quantify the non-tangible benefits. So for instance, actually in Hong Kong as well, although we are still picking up, certainly in New York, Arup was involved in retrofitting over 5,000 sustainable drainage system within the urban areas. So that could be, conventionally just an existing tree planters, you will retrofit and replace with a sustainable drainage system that has the multiple function of stormwater control and water quality treatment. So therefore, I think there are already quite a lot of examples happening around the world of how we can retrofit blue-green natural-based solutions to bring multiple benefits to our society. In Hong Kong, certainly the government are doing pilot trials in different areas. And I think they are now evaluating and monitoring the performance, which would serve to be exemplar of subsequent implementations.
Great, thank you. I think we might have time for last question, and this is for all of you. Whereas designing with nature has been around for a long time, how do you think that the increased interest on mitigating and adapting to climate change has helped to revolutionize and enrich this type of solutions? Maybe you can think of some examples or perspective in your own field.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose in traditional sense, these ecosystems weren't valued for all of the benefits that they can provide. And so nature-based solutions and how they've come about now, where they're providing alternative revenue streams, people who perhaps didn't consider doing sustainable agricultural practices before, now they're looking at those as a real viable option. And so it creates this new market for the communities to focus not only on their normal livelihood, for example, like farming practices, but also the biodiversity outcomes associated with their land. And it also provides an incentive to protect the rainforest and the biodiversity and species within that area that perhaps that incentive wasn't there before.
And Terry?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely endorse everything George just said. I think that's really key, actually. I think as well, the nature-based solutions are intrinsically resilient. They intrinsically have a resilience. It's quite difficult to design into harder solutions. And I think as the climate understanding has really shown the importance of having to adapt and be more resilient, then it's kind of heightens the importance and the contribution that NBS can make. Yeah, I think, yeah, I'll leave it at that. So I'm sure Kenneth wants to come in a
Okay, so for me, increased interest means increased awareness and knowledge. So I think it's quite obvious that people are now not thinking whether it's green infrastructure or nature-based solution versus the gray infrastructure, but rather is actually the gray infrastructure working together with the nature-based solution. So that's one, that knowledge is actually quite important. And then I would also extend that to the, so it's good that we build the nature-based solutions, but at the end of the day, we would still need to have some sort of a maintenance agency to ensure the solution will continue to evolve and so that we regenerate and restore. So I think the increased interest from the maintenance party are also important in a way that, there's increased knowledge for them to accept such solution to be long-lasting. It's not a burden to them, rather it's something that goes back to nature, actually that reduce their maintenance burden in a way, so that actually it becomes more acceptable as a whole. So yeah, that's how I experience it personally.
Thank
Lulu,
you.
can I add to?
Go ahead.
Can I add to that one as well? In the revolutionization of these nature-based solutions, we're also seeing new models of partnerships coming about, because carbon projects can often be quite siloed, and we're needing to see increased cooperation between private sector, public sector, and the NGOs on the ground, and also increased communication with the community. So the project is designed with the community in mind, and that's bringing about a whole swath of new partnership models, which is really fantastic to see.
Great. Perfect keyword to end our session. Partnership, collaboration, and maintenance / stewardship, right? We all need to be stewards for nature, because we all depend on nature. With that, back to Jasper, our MC of the day. You have 30 seconds to wrap up.
Thanks a lot, Lulu and panel. I think that was really a wonderful discussion, and it really felt to me that that hour flew by, and I really hope that all of you enjoyed it as much as I did. So many thanks again to all speakers for sharing your valuable insights, and thanks also to you, the audience. And I hope you really learned something new and see all those cross benefits that the panel discussed. Now, Please be reminded that the next and final session that's hosted by Hong Kong as part of our Race to Zero webinar series will be tomorrow from 4 to 5 p.m. Hong Kong time. During this session, we will go into more depth on the theme of low and zero carbon transport system. So similar as today, we have an excellent panel of experts. So if you haven't registered yet, please do so through the event webpage. Hope to see you tomorrow then, and bye for now. Thank you all.